So thank you everyone so much for coming. We're very excited to share about this research project that has been kind of 2 years in the making. And this portion is a 6 or 7 month project focusing on arts jobs in Washington State. And before we kind of dive into what that is all about, I would like to give just a little bit of background on the project to help kind of contextualize it. So in March 2020, artists lost their jobs in droves. And of course, being artists ourselves, we watched this happen. This happened to us, this happened to our friends. And years later, we know that 63% of artists became fully unemployed compared to 15% of the general population nationwide. And that's really only the artists that they can count. And that was something that we started encountering as we began questioning, well, where are these arts jobs? Who is tracking them in any kind of way? And I'm not trying to create an archive so that we can pull all the under the table work onto the table. That's not where this project is coming from. It's more about how do we create a literacy of creative skills to help creative workers find jobs. And when I was laid off in March of 2020, I went through the WorkSource process, which is the unemployment services in our state. Not very helpful, but just to see what options there are for creative workers. And my personal training is relatively formal. So in that regard, it should be easier to place someone with a pretty formal track into another creative job. And they had no idea what my work was or who to connect me with or how to do it. And they said, perhaps get a job in social media, which is far afield of the work that we do. And I started thinking, this knowledge is not missing necessarily. It's just that people aren't looking for it. And artists amongst ourselves are more aware of the skills that we have, even if they're outside of the discipline that we ourselves work in. So I worked in galleries before COVID and art history and that kind of background. And even though that background is relatively technical and specific, I can still at least guess towards top skills that a photographer might use, or a potter might use, or a project manager in the arts might use, or a development professional might use in an arts context, because we talk to each other all the time, right? And so that's kind of the birthing background of this arts job project is, what if we just started collecting these arts jobs? What if we grabbed the data, put it in one place in an archival style, and just dove into what that information had and what we can do with it? So now let's move into the slides, please. And I want to say, starting off, I have some lists for people who like lists. This slide deck will be available. There's also a list of the different fields that we use, so you definitely don't have to quickly write them down. You can just have the slides. So for people who like to know that in advance, I do. The list will be made available to you if you want to play around with it. So that's kind of the start of our story. And in March, there's a lot of text on these slides, so I hope it's okay if I read these to you so you don't have to focus on that. By late March of 2020, an estimated 305,000 artists and arts workers across Washington state suffered income or job losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. After 2 years, the data shows that 63% of artists nationwide lost income and returned to significantly lower levels of employment after 2 years. And by significantly lower levels, the number that we're looking at is returning to about half of the employment that they had prior to pandemic, which is devastating. The Center for Arts Workers began as a peer-led organization for artists to address the service gap when seeking career support for arts workers. Over 18 months, we built relationships with Hope House, which is a women's shelter here in Spokane, and a network of arts and culture, health, and community-focused nonprofits across Washington to support their work with our creative skills. And by having conversations throughout our community, we're trying to build pathways where we can share job opportunities more directly. So if we find jobs in theater, we have community leaders in theater that can better move that information through their communities than I can, excuse me, as someone without a theater background, without those connections. So getting it to the people who have the higher impact of sharing that information has been a big priority for us. Next slide, please. So our mission at this time is that we provide employment resources for artists through professional development training, futures research, and collaboration with community leaders in order to bring dignity to jobs in the creative sector. The mission is rooted in a desire to address the historical conditions that created socioeconomic, physical, and emotional obstacles around money for many creative professionals. One of the problems that we have in Washington State specifically for our creative workforce is that we are deeply underpaid. This is true nationwide. I believe that many, many, many artists are underpaid for their work. And the data that we have for Washington artists is that we are 45th or lower in the wages that are paid to artists in the nation. So we produce a semi-significant amount of export income, but we are in the bottom 5 states for paying our artists. So this is kind of a regionally specific focus that we're trying to take on right now. But so much of our work has been inspired by organizations in California, in New York, in Boston, Detroit, all over. And it's important to us to provide a framework that other people might be able to adapt and use to their own local needs. I can't know the needs of someone else's local place nearly as well as they could. So we want to create a very, very basic step-by-step guide that creatives can then take and adapt to the needs that their creative community is facing. And so that's something that we hope to publish with our report. So a little bit of why we work in the creative economy. This is something that I mentioned earlier, that the knowledge around arts jobs in Washington is just really, really lacking. That skill literacy is very, very low. And not only is the literacy of our skills low, but the amount of money that's dedicated to personnel costs is dramatically dropping. So that means that fewer and fewer creatives are being employed for their skills. So we have this twinned issue of not having the knowledge, and then the money can't be allocated for a group that is not being advocated for in this specific way. Okay, next slide, please. The Arts Job Board, this is what we're working on. This is a pretty simple concept. Overall, it's taking the job descriptions of jobs that we find, kind of taking on the perspective of a job seeker, just looking for jobs, what is out there, and downloading those descriptions and using that as our original source documents. So for each one of the jobs that are in our small database, we have the original job description or screenshots of whatever that job description was as it was posted online, so that we can give that information along with the research if people are interested, and also break it down and analyze it according to the language that was originally used. Okay, next slide, please. This is what it looks like. Before pandemic, I was afraid of Excel. I'm afraid of spreadsheets. It's not something that I ever needed to learn in my arts work. And through pandemic, I had to teach myself basically this, but I decided that the information was far too important to leave in an Excel spreadsheet that isn't graphically interesting to artists. And so part of the process of collecting this information is making it legible within our specific community. This is boring stuff, okay? There is no doubt in our minds that some of this can be really tedious, and also, unfortunately, it's important. So our effort to combat how boring it can be is by color coding it in a meaningful way that you can read across, okay, I'm looking for these things every time. Like once you know what you're looking for, okay, I have this degree or that experience or these, this, and this skills. Most of my skills are blue and I'll just look for those. Like whatever it ends up being, it becomes more of a usable tool than having to read every single word on the page. So we're trying to think about it from different perspectives and how we can make it a usable tool specifically for artists, and then secondarily to the workforce community and to other folks. But our priority is helping artists get this information into their heads. So let's dive into what some of these categories are. Here's the list I promised you. These are the current fields that we're using and collecting information on. And right now we have about 135 jobs in our database, and we're looking to have about 200 or so by the end of the project to just get not a comprehensive archive, but just some amount of information in one place that currently doesn't exist. So here's what we're working with. And what we're going to do today is dive into maybe 3 of these fields that we found particularly interesting. And if you want to talk to me about any of the others, please get in touch. Be happy to walk through why and what some of the other ones are. But we're just going to look at a couple today.
Sorry, I keep having little technical difficulties.
Totally not a problem. We're so grateful for your help. Okay, so these are some of the fields that we want to add, and the occupational code is one that kind of triggered this project because of the incredibly vague language that is used to describe artists. So when the language is already very vague, it's hard to be convinced that people are really looking out for us in a workforce sense and really focusing on getting creative people in innovative jobs. Like, I think that a lot of community prosperity can happen when creative people are allowed to express their creativity in the community. And that can happen in all kinds of ways, not just arts jobs, but they really bring a lot to every job that they hold. So some of these other ones, have reasons behind them. Well, they all have reasons behind them. But one of the things, the student loan stipend is something that I'm passionate about. If you're asking us for master's degrees, you got to pay for that, because we had to pay for that. You got to pay us something for that. We didn't just pay off our loan real quick. So please give us a stipend for that, just like healthcare. Next slide, please. Job descriptions and sourcing. The titles are really a big challenge, and that was the first barrier that I was really coming up against in my personal experience with unemployment services and workforce development. Was they just had no idea what an arts writer is. But within my arts community, that is a known thing. And so it was frustrating to be outside of that community and just be in this lost ocean of not knowing what that was. So tracking what those are called and kind of diving into how the language does or doesn't draw people in to these titles, and where are they coming from? Because right now in Washington, we really have one main arts website, Artist Trust, that gathers them together. And there's about one other job board that you might find arts jobs. Otherwise, you have to go to the individual website and hope that you find it, hope they're hiring. But there's very little centralized information if you wanted to look for your title across organizations, for example. So next slide, please. Titles and occupational codes. How does the title that you have for your job connect with the codes that are the standard for every other organization? In my experience of working in retail, but in an arts context, we're coded as retailer warehousing, but not as artists, even though every aspect of what we were doing, selling art supplies, teaching people how to use the art supplies and make art and making art ourselves, was all within an arts framework. But if artists are coded out as different things in the workforce, it's harder and harder to advocate for what is actually a larger group than we have information for. And as you can see on this slide, some of the language that's used around these codes: independent artists, writers, and performers. So if you're any of this long list of things, you all have the same code, if you were given the correct coding anyway. But that 711510 covers dozens of different jobs. So it just puts us all into one umbrella, which it's nice to all hang out, but also having literacy around these skills is something that can help when we break things down a little bit more. Okay, next slide, please. County and county served. This is one that we feel very strongly about and is pretty locally focused. A lot of our aid and money spending happens on the west side of the state. And we're looking at where the jobs are mostly happening. And at this point in our archive, most of the jobs are also on the west side of the state. And looking at, for statewide organizations, where are you located and what are the counties that you serve? We have 43 counties in Washington, and just seeing what the spread of those jobs looks like. And for people who are living in smaller counties, we want to be able to give them information that's relevant to their county. You don't have to move to do your art. We want you to be able to do art everywhere that you are, because there are artists living everywhere, not just in 2 major cities, and really trying to support people where they are. And housing is very expensive right now, so please don't move. In Washington, it sucks. So you're all in LA, like, sorry, I'm so sorry. You have harder problems than we do. Next slide, please. So in the fall, we're going to present the archive with the jobs that we've collected over 6 months, and also a report that details our process, our methodology, the fields that we're using, and kind of dives deeper into that information and what we've learned from the process, and present that primarily to both our communities in Washington and also some arts organizations, and kind of get the word out. And having a document that gives kind of a timestamp of what things are looking like right now is something that in our community is a struggle, is to have that information and have that publishing information. So we're really looking forward to adding to the work that folks are doing in this way. And next slide, please. We're artists, so when we share information, we're also going to have an opera. Why not? So a friend of ours writes opera and is going to support us in this and write a piece that relates to artists and work, artists and labor. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I'm excited to see what Madeline comes up with. And she's done a couple of other performances that we've supported recently in our community, and we're super excited to see how she sings our sorrows and celebrates the grief and triumph that we have through this research process. So make it fun. We're artists and we can have both things at once. Our pilot program, after the launch of our report and our performance, will be delivering more of these services, virtual career services, to artists. So Remelisa actually applied and secured one of the jobs in our arts database. And that was an exciting way to start it off. By doing this deep dive and working one-on-one with people, we know that it works. And we're super excited to bring this vision into the world. So that's happening in the fall and the winter. Next slide, please. Questions? Are you a worker center or a research center? Yes. Yes, we are both. The Center for Arts Workers is a both and division of arts workers supporting arts infrastructure in the places we live and work. We've been trained in critical problem solving, imagination, critical theory, community organizing, curation, art history, teaching arts, and a smattering of other interpersonal skills. Let's build new structures together. While COVID-19 urged our work into the world, many of the artists involved or yet to have watched the state of the arts in Washington for decades and want to use our skills to expand this sector and bring others up with us. Next slide, please. How are we funded? Excellent question. We're looking for fiscal sponsorship right now, and we have recently applied for a grant that is a People's WPA style grant in Seattle that we will find out about in August. So there are many resources. Money is one of them, but skills are what keep us going. So a lot of volunteer efforts and skills and time and passion have driven this work for the last 2 years, but the money will come. So next slide, please. How do you get involved? We are super open to contact and communication. Please get in touch with us on Instagram, email, here, wherever. We're open. We love to chat. Hit us up. The end. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation. Questions, concerns, horoscopes? I'll take whatever you have.
I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say I used to live in Seattle. I think now it's almost 20 years ago. I went to the University of Washington for undergrad. So I'm just curious as to how different it is there now. Because I think when I was there, like Starbucks had just started. And then like all of the tech stuff like eBay and those things had already, had just begun to launch. So yeah, it must be crazy. The cost of living must have skyrocketed and everything. But I'm just curious, did you, where are you getting like, are you looking at job boards, or how are you getting all of this information to put into your Excel sheet?
Yeah, so we are looking at jobs boards, and we're also looking at the SAM website or Wing Luke, or like looking, because we have, Remelisa and I both trained in art history. So we have a specific bias in that particular route of like, it's easier for me to find museum jobs than it is to find photography jobs. So we're trying to pull more and more people in to help broaden out the data that we're finding. But we're looking at, like I said, the Artist Trust Board, Idealist has more arts jobs than any other board, but these jobs just don't happen on like Indeed or LinkedIn or a lot of these places, like, or artists don't go there. I don't use LinkedIn. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not as embedded in our culture. People still ask where the original Starbucks building is, though, unfortunately. So that has not changed in those years.
In LA for many years, we've had this listserv, and it's I think LA Culture Net listserv, and it's still going, and it's just this listserv where people list jobs or list sometimes like even exhibition opportunities or performers or like all sorts of stuff, but it's essentially mostly arts, like visual art focused, but general kind of culture, all wide arts. And people on their own add to the listserv, and I think it's like falling out more and more as people just are like younger and younger and like don't even know what a listserv is. But
that's so here though. Listservs are really helpful.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, I mean, if I'm sure you have considered being the platform that these folks post jobs on, because that way you would create the data intake categories, and then it's like it would take all of that really hard work off of your plate, and it would put it on the plate of the corporations who are actually seeking these people. If you were the platform that people list things on. So I'm sure you've considered that. And it would take, lots of networking and getting these but the work would go, instead of the tedious work of doing all of that kind of intake stuff or whatever, the work would go towards the networking and like getting people to list on your platform, right?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't necessarily be more work, it would just be allocated in a different place.
And I think in that model that you're talking about of us being the platform, that could be the funding, because it's super important to me, but to all of us, that these services are free for artists. If you are any other profession, you can go to WorkSource and get free support. There is no reason that artists should pay for the exact same thing, except better because we're artists. That's not, it's not our fault. To have that for artists. So this needs to be free, but I think organizations like the Seattle Art Museum can pay us to talk to people, right? And that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
I also just think that like having the interface with these, or like creating a situation where you're interfacing with these organizations. One of the things I think I really love the most about what you're doing is the accessibility aspect of it. That you're seeing that like different personalities and learning types and even visual styles and all of these kinds of things like need to intake information in different ways. But I think that like if the whole way that other organizations and companies have to interface with you is through those needs, then it also provides a way for you to like teach these organizations and companies like what they should be thinking about, and like the way they should be approaching this as well, versus when you keep it all in-house and you do all of that work, like you're the one who's doing all of that work and they're not learning, they're still listing shit in like a sus way.
Yeah. I love that so much, Chrissy. Thank you so much about, because it is a cultural conversation that we're trying to have. And I don't know if anyone here follows Change the Museum. It's happening, right? People are, and what I love about it is people are standing up and saying, I will not recommend this employer to my friends. The weapon that we have is the strength that we have. It's our word of mouth networks for artists. That's what organizations and marketers and everyone wants, is that quality of word of mouth that artists really already have. And when they say, we're unable to say this is a good place to work because it's not, that has an impact in our arts communities. You know, when we're telling the folks that we studied with, don't even bother, you just lost a whole class of folks over and over and over again. So I really love that interfacing potential and setting a standard.
Yeah, because I mean, if there is such high unemployment, I mean, these are the times when cultural shifts can happen, because the leverage is on the side of the people. And so historically, you always see it's like, sorry, there's a cat tail. Historically, you know, it's like after the plague, all the peasants revolted, right? Like it's, and some things changed, and it did bring about capitalism, but but a lot of things did change, at least for periods. And I just think that like now is the time to create those cultural dynamics, but like we have to enforce them,
yes,
as workers through what we normalize. And so we have to create a quality of normation that changes the cultural standards. And that's one way to do them, is by being the organizations ourselves and then saying you can only interface with us in these new ways.
Yes. And to that end, we are very, very big on part-time, super awesome. Many employers do not provide health benefits with 40-hour weeks anyway. And artists are busy people. Y'all have 6 jobs. So there's really no reason to take on another 40 hours necessarily for many, many people. And the way that we have been getting volunteer support has been, come in when you have time. When you don't have time, or you are not feeling good, take a break, please. Take a rest. As we like to say, like, the work is urgent in the sense that it could have, should have been done before we were born, but not urgent that it needs to be done by Friday. It's like climate change. It should have already been done, definitely not due this weekend. So trying to hold balance for that and showing up when you feel good. We have connections with the chronic illness and disability community. We want to be very understanding and accepting of every working style. So that's the new future. And let's slow it down. The climate is begging us to slow down. Let's say yes to that invitation.
This also reminds me of something that I still have yet to hear back from, but a group called Satiated Artists does a bit of, like, they take a percentage of an hourly, which unfortunately they max out at $18 an hour, but what they do is they find people who want to hire artists, and then they advocate for artists to work part-time jobs so that the artists have more time to work on their stuff. I don't know if I can fully recommend it yet because I'm waiting to see how this pans out for me trying to use it. But I like the advocacy that they do. I think another thing that would be interesting component to your site would be like, what are the wages that freelance workers are asking for? So like if you take out the hiring from the top down of 6-month to full-time jobs, like I just put it out there on like Instagram stories that currently I'm only asking for minimum $25 to $30 an hour. But the idea is that there needs to be solidarity that no one works for less than 25 an hour.
Yes, yes.
And so there's something that I forgot that freelancers might not do as much, which is like asking everyone what you get paid in the workplace is only as awkward as people don't talk about what they find hard to advocate for their own pay. And then I just found out that a friend is going to ask for like $30 to $35 for working at the brand, or not the brand, at the Broad. So I'm trying to figure out who's going to be tracking in LA the pay rates. Because the other thing that you could even do, besides having people try to like sign on to not accepting less than a certain minimum, is that you could even contrast an art handling place like Cook's Crating. Maybe they're charging $80 an hour. If you're like a freelance art handler, it helps to know everyone else's rates too, because then they might not have to go through a job that will only pay if you work full time. And one of the other advocacy things I would love to see that satiated artists, this is like going back to them, they actually promise to provide healthcare if the organization you're working for doesn't at 30 hours a week.
Nice.
Which I think is really good. But my ideal is still everyone working around 21 hours a week and having healthcare. And
even less though, even like
yeah,
folks need their healthcare. You know what? Yeah, we really advocate for healthcare because you have a body.
yeah. I was
work
thinking
your body.
21 hours as like I can't remember the UK study, but it figured out you the same efficiency or whatever as a 40-hour work week. So basically reminding people that we're not better off because you have 40 hours. But I think you still also have to convince artists not to get too busybody about things and actually rest and not just like spend every extra waking hour working on some other projects too. But it's hard to
This is how I rest.
Right. Goodness.
Yeah.
I was gonna add on to Cedric's like artists or arts workers or workers like asking what they're being paid. That can be really uncomfortable. I did that in my last job. And I felt like I was definitely crossing a line, like anyway, but I don't know if you guys are aware that Arts for LA has a job board, and they made it mandatory like a year ago that if you list a job on it, you have to list the pay. You have to list what they're going to get paid. And this is, to me, I feel like that's what should, like, workers shouldn't have to be necessarily having those uncomfortable conversations. They should just be that, like, there, you know. And actually, since I was told that, I go to the jobs board and I like to look, and I like to specifically look at the pay, the position, and the organization and what the expectations are. And it's so fascinating. It's such an education, actually, like an education I never received as to what should be expected. And then how varied it is, that if you're a director of, you know, a small arts organization, you might be getting like 40,000 a year versus, you know, some other organization. Anyway, it's that, to me, like that's like a wonderful use of a job board that creates agency for those applicants and for arts workers.
Yeah, we also talk about, oh yeah, we need to be making $20, $30 an hour for living wage, but no, actually most artists should be making consulting fees. And you know, when companies hire a consultant, they pay upwards of $150, $200 an hour. And I had a vision. I had this project fairly short-lived a few years ago for conceptual art consultants. And one of my visions was like getting artists hired as cognitive laborers. You know, lots of artists are very smart. They have areas of research, you know, like companies are always wanting to hire people to be like on the cutting edge of culture. And so why not hire, you know, a highly educated artist to do this labor, and that labor should come with a high price tag. And the vision was like the consulting firm would take a cut, but like most of that would go to the artist. So the artist would be making, you know, $100, $150 an hour to do this labor. Because like the problem is that it's not that there's not money out there. The problem is that the labor is undervalued.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
and the way what we've learned from tech is the way to raise the value of labor is to have a middleman. And now my firm would take a small cut, not like what, you know, Uber takes of like rides and stuff, but like to have it like an organization where it's like, no, you are hiring the best people, so you're going to pay for it. Like, and I think I need to bring that project back somehow.
That's what I was thinking too, to Eric's point, is like, you know, you also have the opportunity to define what arts work is. And you have an opportunity to work with these organizations to craft what kind of things they should even be looking for. Like, what if you created a position on your platform that was like a consulting position? And like what if you were a matchmaker, right? Like, what if you were a Yenta and you could have these kinds of like things that you create together, and you're like, wouldn't this be the perfect date for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's very much like that. It's very much this personalized combination of what are your skills and interests, and who's looking, and how can I match these things like this? Because I think that's very possible. And that's what we talk about. It's who you know, right? In getting arts jobs, that's already happening. Most of all of these things are already happening, and it's bringing them into one space and leveraging them happening at the same time to really propel that. And
because these people generally don't actually even know what they're looking for. Like, a lot of times they don't even know what they're looking for. No one knows what they're doing. No one knows what they're doing, and there are no rules.
There are no rules. And we, like you kind of mentioned earlier, the state of chaos that we're in right now is also a state of possibility.
There are no careers.
To rewrite the rules and simply show up with a notebook and say, we actually have a whole notebook full of rules, and people will say, oh, really? Right? The way
if you say you have rules, they will just believe you.
Yes.
That's how all of history has happened.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm excited to see what happens when we bring some new rules to the table and say, this is what we need. These are the things that matter to us. These are the things that we need. So, yeah, we're certainly playing around with the website idea and how to make a platform of it. I was helping some friends during early pandemic who actually built out a platform fundamentally for this, but for a different aspect of the project. And I'm hoping that we can reconnect that work and launch it in the same vein. So bits and pieces, but it takes the work of everyone. It takes all of these different interests and skill sets all together in one big place to make special things happen. And I'm really excited that so many people have given us support and their time and their skills and their feedback. And thank you for sharing your time with us today. It feels really good to share this in this environment. So thank you for hosting.
I have a question. I have a question still.
Please.
I'm curious. I'm forgetting what it stands for, but the NAICS codes. Why are you interested in collecting that?
So these are North American Industry Coding System, I believe is the acronym. And these codes are associated with jobs. So when I was filling out my unemployment paperwork, they didn't have the name of what I do. And so I said, I am a curator, because that's the kind of closest thing that you have to what I do, but I'm not a curator. But I'm going to write that down because I don't know what else to do. And my mom has HR background, and I actually called her and said, do you think they'll deny my unemployment claim if I say that I still want to work in the arts after this unemployment? And she's like, oh my gosh, no, definitely just say yes and move on. They don't care. But there are stigmas around arts and working in the arts. And I honestly just didn't know what is happening from the paperwork background side of things I was afraid of being pushed back into retail, because looking on paper at some of this, you could say, you have retail skills. I'm like, no, I have a different set of skills that is in a retail environment, but it is not, I can't work at Target, y'all. I just can't be professional in khaki. I can't make it happen. So how do we describe ourselves according to our own knowledge and each other's knowledge? We have so many skills, and we're having a problem re-employing people. Many of these jobs disappeared, yes, but also if we don't know what the skills are, the codes, I'm hoping to use their own language to show them the holes, because using our language to show them the holes, I don't think they're paying attention. So sometimes kind of quoting them back to themselves in their rules. I don't know if that answers your question.
And it feels like there's like two things that have to be done simultaneously. Like one is like doing exactly like what you're doing and sort of making this like super crucial work of making like addressing the reality of today with the metrics of today in a way, and just like making sure that like the things that don't fit the grid of like how employment works and how hourly rate works, like how to make sure that like our people can fit in. And then at the same time, I feel like there is also the problem that like the valuation, like what is valued in art is not something that fits any metrics, right? And in a way, it's like a different kind of value that is not meant to fit metrics. So I feel it's like often our jobs are like either like some can fit a metric, like if you have a job that's like a 9-to-5 curator job, for example, and you do whatever you need to do within that time and it's good, it's fine. But I feel like a lot of us like work in like all sorts of ways. And like, for example, like I was hiring an assistant for a project last month, and I was just like, oh my God, I can't pay that person more than like $17.50 an hour. The person doesn't have experience and that's all the budget. And then I calculated my own hourly rate and I'm like, I'm probably below $10 an hour, probably like at $5 an hour, because I don't make any money with this project. It's going to cost me like 2 months of work and I get like a $3,000 thing. And out of that, I need to pay everyone. So it's like, I mean, of course, I get other stuff out of it, but at the end of the day, it feels like any kind of monetary valuation system will be so inadequate for the job. And then it feels more like, I kind of wish there was something like, I remember somebody talking about like universal planetary services as like the future, saying like everyone in the world should have access to like healthcare, like housing, retirement, some kind of retirement, and shelter. And so just doing like instead of thinking about universal basic income, thinking about like universal planetary minimum services, you know, like, and I was like, I'd be happy like with a structure like this, where just I don't have to think about being fed, about like where I'm going to sleep, about my health insurance. And I don't need money after that. I need a little bit, but I don't need a ton of money. And it kind of feels stupid. Like, I just feel like if I don't know, like a few centuries ago, I could become like a painter in a monastery or something and just like not worry about other shit all the time. Whereas like in this world, I have to like make everything fit into a business framework. And it's so like, it's such a waste of time and energy, and it just doesn't fit. So I don't know, I feel like there's on one hand, like the absolutely necessary work of making things work within this square reality of today. And at the same time, there's also like the necessity of building a kind of another framework, or at least imagining another framework. And I constantly feel myself like between the two, like having to do both at the same time. And I find it like super hard. So anyway.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicola, because that's very much that we just call it dream work. Like when this project started, I was in a personal journey of retraining myself into anything opposite or other than what I had first trained in that got myself unemployed. So like, what can I learn? I almost studied accounting, and my sister said, that's too boring. You're actually going to not thrive in that. It's like very, very, very boring. So I learned grant writing, and I wrote up grant, my entire like learning process was for something that didn't exist. And a couple of friends got really excited about it. And they're like, you just dreamt and wrote it. Oh yeah, we can dream and write stuff. Oh my gosh, guys, we can write the rules. And keeping that in mind of this space, I love so much for exactly that, because everyone in this space is dreaming and writing new rules, and we're doing it together. And it's so reaffirming to be here every month and see what y'all are up to, because it's urgently necessary that we dream a new future.
I put a link to the wage calculator, the wage fee calculator there. So if anybody is ever kind of wondering like what a baseline should be, it's usually based, what I really love about the wage fee calculator is that it's based on what folks like what the budget of the organization is, because it's like there's a place in Philly called Vox Populi, and like, you know, they're kind of like an artist run space and they don't have the same budget as the Met, you know? And so you can't expect them to give you the same kind of budget as the Met, right? But I think that like even with like when you're working with corporations or organizations, like I use the wage fee calculator for like a graphic design job. Like I do graphic design sometimes for the Silver Lake Jewish Center, and I use whatever like their operating budget is, and I look over and try to find the closest operating budget, and that's kind of how I know what to charge them. So I think that that's, but to the point, to Nicholas's point of just kind of like, you know, I've like thought about utopian philosophy for a really long time, and I used to think that it was possible to like blow something up from the inside. But I really think the best strategy is just to build what you want to build. Like the world you want to build is going to look so much more attractive to whatever fascist hellscape people are currently in. And this even is like, you know, like instead of like waiting for a record deal first, I like made an album first, and then it turns out that like people are actually interested in actual human beings that have like an expanded kind of perspective, and the world is being reshaped by whoever is just doing what they are going to do. And so it's like, I think that perspective of just like building the future that you want. And I think it's Mujeres Creyendo, they're a Bolivian feminist anarcho collective, says be careful with the present you create because it must look like the future you dream.
That's beautiful.
And so I think that there is a way to speak this utopian language to these crypto bros that could help fund this platform, or whoever, you know. There is a way to speak a language that they're both interested in that doesn't make you feel gross. And because it's like the language of possibility.
Yes. We are inviting ourselves into workforce development conversations. And last year we attended one that was kind of focused on youth and technology and how to get the youth to be creative and technological and these things. And so we said, firstly, when we signed up for this, they asked, what industry do you come from? And we said, other, arts and culture, the thing you call us, but you didn't write us on the list because you didn't think we were going to show up. Rude. We are absolutely here. So they were talking about how necessary.
Them only.
I know, just like, come on, guys, start.
There's no steam in this engine.
Yeah. So they were talking about the necessity of teaching children creativity. And I said, okay, so we've established that it's necessary. What are you doing to teach creativity to children? And they said, we're teaching them Squarespace. Okay. Squarespace teaches itself. There are tutorials on YouTube that you can take. That's not what I'm asking. And I think it occurred to them in that moment of like, this may not be enough. We have banked on Squarespace and it's actually possible that isn't enough. I'm like, yes. Do you remember when y'all taught us like, what was it, Microsoft Publisher, and told us it was the future? well, you tricked us, didn't you? Because I have never made one feasible project in Publisher. So I just found it really interesting that their answer is so narrowly technological, and giving a child a pencil and a piece of paper is outside the frame, even though it's fundamentally cheaper to do and more fun for everyone. So emphasizing how do we build this creative relationship when we refuse to pay artists and promote artistic creation, to promote the culture. Like, how are you valuing it if you're refusing to value it? And just making workforce have that conversation amongst themselves.
Also, this is, oh, sorry, Tati.
Oh, I had a really quick, easy question, which is how many are you that are working on this?
Yeah. How many of us do you think there are right now?
5, 6.
Yeah. Yeah, probably 5 or 6 of us. We roam in and out, but probably right now there's about 5 or 6 of us. We have a bio slide that I decided to remove from today's presentation because that's changing up all the time, but we're kind of pulling in folks, and we have about 6 people working on it right now, but we're also very connected with other community leaders, which probably make us about 12 with some mentors and folks. So I'm very fortunate to have mentors who actually have workforce development experience in an arts perspective. And I'm kind of roping them in. I roped in a mentor of mine from the 90s. Thankfully, his landline still works. That's good. And I just reached out and was like, hey, we have an urgent need. You built a school in the 90s. Can you help us build our thing for the arts? It is urgent right now. And they signed on. And it's exciting to have people just committing to something they don't fully understand and running with it. So we're pretty excited for the fall. And I'll bring back here what we like, the deliverables. I really hate that word. It sounds like I'm bringing you pizza, and I'm not. The stuff we make sounds more comfortable, so call it that.
I was gonna just bring up another like tangential thing, that if you ever want to talk about another disability access point, like I was just thinking about Tati describing how difficult it is to talk with other people about pay. But I was thinking about how much the neurodivergent community does body doubling, and like even helping other people to show up, not just co-working to apply for jobs, but something around how people can get like advocates and support even right before you're about to be interviewed, where you might actually be negotiating pay. There's so many like pain points that I think of that become a lot easier from like a mutual aid standpoint. But I don't know how many people formalize things like that. But if it's on the same site as the place where you found out about the job, it's another aspect that I feel like would make people really feel like they can own this project with you and help support it.
I'm envisioning that when you contact us, that person who is matched with you will help you all the way through that process, help you with your resume, help you with the sleuthing. And in that, oh, I am afraid to talk about money. Okay, can we have a call? But you're still working with that one person that you built this relationship with. So hopefully they can help through all of that. But I love that idea. And I think mutual aid does make it, that is the strength in what we're doing. That's how this project started. When I was laid off, my attitude was, well, I've just lost my money, but I've just gained 40 hours back. I want to dedicate that to people who are working and now are probably working double time and just absolutely slammed. Like, how can I donate my time to them and alleviate some of their pressure? So it's all about alleviation and supporting each other. And yeah, I love this idea.
Cedric, so it's like working together, like you co-work in the same space to emotionally support one another as you're applying for jobs or something?
It could be virtual as well. because a lot of people usually think of like co-working as going somewhere together, like a coffee shop. But I've been in a couple things, like one's called Divergent Design Studios, put on by a woman named Marta Rose. And there's like maybe 16 plus people who all offer to host an hour or two on Zoom, but it's literally like everyone has their cameras off, but it's like a check-in on what do people think they want to get accomplished. And then people tend to work, and then there's like a checkout after an hour, and it's like, do people get done the thing they want to get done? But it's really easy to decentralize, but it reminds me a bit of like how AA is a bunch of people that just agree to come together at a given time. And I've found that it like takes, like it's the main thing that every ADHD guru is offering, which is basically like community. But it's strange to me because I don't think you need a guru or a fee to like set that up, but you do still need enough admin to arrange who's hosting Zoom this time. And so the one I do is like $5 a month, but it's like we have 3 different types of things. One could be on writing. One is, they call it like gardening, but they specifically mean like building a garden, either literally or like philosophically in your life, building like how your time is organized. And then there's another one on just like pure support, but they all have the same structure.
That sounds really cool. I'm curious about gardening your time. That's very interesting.
Should we stop recording?
Oh yeah, I can do that.